Hi and welcome back to a boat called Wanda. Well, for this week, one of the first things I need to do is sort out that heating. First of all, I do need the heating before I can get the primer on, and I'm just about ready to put some primer on Wanda, but mainly I just can't stand working in this temperature anymore. It's 1 degree below at the moment, so it's absolutely cold in here, and I want to get the heating set up, at least for my own comfort. Now, as you might have seen from my last update, I'd recently bought a space heater that runs on diesel or kerosene. Now, the constraint I've got is I'm not actually allowed to run that in this shed because the yard has an insurance policy that prevents them from having any sort of naked flame whatsoever running in the shed. I am allowed to use it, but it has to be run outside of this shed, and I can pump warm air into the shed so long as the unit itself is sat outside. So to do that, I've just ordered this, which has arrived recently, which is some ducting, some insulated ducting. Now, the second thing I'll need is a panel that will fit across this doorway so that I can open this up and have the panel here and run the heater outside. Right, so there's a panel here now that I've cut out, and I've put that across this doorway here. I've got a hole cut out, and here's my insulated ducting going through. And then on this side, I have the ducting coming through, and it's connected up to the space heater, which is just set up outside here. On this side of the heating unit, there's a control panel, and this control panel consists of a thermostat controller, a digital display showing the temperature, and somewhere around here in this panel there must be a temperature sensor which feeds the temperature back to the thermostat controller and the display output. Now, currently with the setup, I've got the heater out there, pumping air into the shed here, and so there's a disconnect between the temperature in the shed and the temperature out there. I did a quick test the other day, and ultimately what will happen is if that unit can't detect that the temperature is changing, it'll switch itself off, and I guess that's to prevent it from just running indefinitely. So what I need to do is create a feedback to the unit out there of the temperature in here, so that hopefully as it's rising a little bit, it feeds that back to the unit, it understands the temperature's going up, and the whole thing should work. Okay, well I just ran it for about 15-20 minutes as a proof of concept, and the unit was working well enough. The temperature reading is 7 degrees now. It started off at about 4 degrees. So this pipe was feeding back the internal air from the shed, and I could see that it was rising. But what I did notice after about 20 minutes was there was a bit of a smell of something sort of smoking a little bit, and I think the problem is this is incredibly hot. It blows out some very, very hot air, and I think this insulated heating duct which I've bought isn't quite up to the spec for the temperature of heat that comes out. I think at this stage what I need to do, like this is going to work, but what I need to do is get a little bit more technical and try and get the specification from the heating company as to what the temperature is of the hot air as it exits the unit, and then make sure that I can buy perhaps a more industrial grade ducting material that will be able to have high enough tolerance for that heat to come out. This is something I'm keen to try out next. I just bought this dust guard from eBay the other day. It was pretty cheap. It's about £8, and it's advertised as a generic one that fits most grinders. It fits on really tightly. It's really good solid fit there. And it's just got a general vacuum hose adapter here. So let me try this out to see if it actually works. Yeah, well, it seems to be working really well. There's a tiny bit of dust coming out, the blue dust that I can see gathering on the deck top, but I'd say most of it gets sucked into the vacuum cleaner, which is great. So yeah, that's a really good buy. I'm really happy with that. And that's what it looks like afterwards. I've just got a little bit of foam here that is drying. Once it's dried, I can sand that back to give me a nice flat surface to laminate against. Now this was actually a diesel heater exhaust outlet, and the whole pipe was really rusted because obviously this is going to be below the waterline at some point, so I'm not really keen on having, well, I don't have a diesel heater at the moment. When I put one in, I'm not keen on having the exhaust here. So I'm just going to seal this up, laminate it up, and fill and fairer and then paint it. Okay, so this is set nicely, and now I can put some filling compound around this gap here. So back to my trusty old 404 high density filler. This edge over here is a little bit thin, so I might have to use a syringe to try and squeeze it in there. Okay, that should do it. Obviously this 404 is about structural filling. It's very, very strong for large cavities, but it does actually sort of dip a little bit. So I'll come back once this is set and put some more sort of lighter fairing compound around here so that I can profile this and get it nice so that laminate will flow over this nicely. But for now that's sort of filled up this void here and will be structurally sound. So I'll come back and keep working on that once this is dry. I've turned full circle when it comes to putting the radius down against the toe rail, which I have started to do and I've done most of. And I've decided to go back to where I started from, here we go, and use a radius ball. And the reason I'm doing that is obviously a radius ball is a sphere, so it doesn't matter what angle you're applying it with, whatever angle your hand is set to, it's always going to give you the same contour. So I probably just should have got this to start with. I just needed to get a bigger one because the one that I had was too small. So anyway, I've got a 19-25mm set, and then I think this is a 15-9. So one of these will do the job. I'll just have to scrub out some of that radius that's not great and reset it doing one of these. Okay, so it's time to try out this trusty fillet ball. I've got two sizes here, 25 and 19mm, and I'll just do a little test run here to see how it goes. Now previously I used a teaspoon to start with, and then I used that sort of silicone application tool. And the problem with both of those devices were they were fine so long as the angle was always consistent, but as soon as you had to round a corner, turn a corner or anything like that, or if your hand moved, then that whole angle of the radius got adjusted, and so it wasn't consistent. So I'm quite optimistic that this radius ball is going to make life a lot easier, particularly when I'm trying to get around corners. Now I think what I'll do is I'll start with the larger side and try and sort of work the excess off first, and then do a second run with the smaller side. Well, that's pretty easy. And then it's just a matter of getting that excess off. Well, that was pretty straightforward, so let me do a little bit more now. Okay, well it's minus 2.5 degrees outside, and inside it's about minus 0.5 degree. So also I can't run my space heater yet. I'm still waiting for the high temperature ducting to arrive, so it limits what I can do to Wanda. There's a bit more fairing and laminating that I need to do, but I can't do that with these temperature conditions. So the only thing left to do is engage in a little bit of graffiti. Well, here's the hull after it's been sanded in its entirety. Most of the blue stripe has come off, and you can see what's here is the original blue stripe. So the one that I could see was actually one that had been a respray at some point. And basically there's a few little nicks and dings here and there. That grey primer spray paint that I sprayed the entire hull in has been really good, because it's really easy to identify any little nicks or pinholes now, so that was worth doing. So in terms of hull preparation and putting primer on, this is good to go now. I just need to fill up some of those pinholes up the front, but this has come up pretty well. Well, I'm about halfway through sanding back the new radius that I put on, and I'm really glad I did that. So basically I went around and repeated the radius using that radius ball, or fillet ball as they're called, and I just wish I'd done that in the first place. It's such a good tool, such a good thing to have. I'll put a link to the one that I bought down below in the description, so check that out if you've got a similar job to do, because I think it's just going to save you a whole lot of time and hassle. I just quickly made this up to help me with the sanding job. It was made using my table router, and I just put a corner bit which had, I think it's a 1/4 inch diameter on one side and then a shallow diameter on the other side. So I've kind of got two angles that I can use. There's a shallower one here and a steeper one on there, so I can sort of get the perfect angle to sound that out. So basically I use the shallower angle to run it along the side, and that will sound that last little piece of residue off. So that's cleaned up the side here and made it nice and smooth, and then for the bottom I just turn it round and use this side of it. Okay, so that's taken care of this, and then I just do a couple of goes like this on an angle, get rid of any little bumps. Obviously I need to be careful I don't sand the whole thing away, and that's it. So basically I've done that side, and now I need to do this side, and this is done using the second go, using the fillet ball. As you can see, it's quite even. To compare that to this side over here, where I was using that silicone beading tool and teaspoons and all sorts of things, and hopefully you can see there it's just a lot more uneven. You can see the height of it sort of comes up and down a lot. Okay, so there's a little bit of work to do around this G10 piece of core that I'm using here to try and level everything out, ready for some laminate. There's a bit of a ridge here which I need to take care of, and I could use some fair ink compound, but instead I just want to build it up with a bit more laminate. So it's time for some laminating again, once again. I'm using this 1200 again, and it's fine, but you just need to make sure that you really work the resin through it because it's so thick. And obviously I've made some mistakes in the past where I didn't get enough through, and it's created a couple of little air pockets which I don't want to ever see again, so just need to be really careful. And that looks good. That looks like it's really absorbed a lot of resin. I actually wet it out on a piece of cardboard first on the other side. I must admit, after using vinyl ester again recently, I do think it's a lot easier than epoxy, just in terms of the technique for applying it. Anyway. Okay, done. Now I've just got one last thing to do, which is to fill up these holes with some very thick epoxy. These 4 holes here are actually just the cable glands that came through to go into the mast, so there was 4 separate cables here. I don't know what solution I'm going to end up with, but I think the best thing to do is just fill these up so that whatever new solution I come up with, I can re-drill whatever I need to do. And then over here, these were the other 2 screws from the mast step that go down. And actually all these went into was a hole with a lot of silicone in it. And these were like machine screws, maybe about 35 millimeters long, that just sort of went through into this. There's a smaller hole here, and I've just over drilled it so that I can fill this up with thickened epoxy and then re-drill it once I put that mast base back on. Okay, there's a bit more work to do on the cockpit here. I've got some fairing compound setting there. I need to do that in sections, so there's a square piece, and once that's dry then I can skim around the outside. But what I want to do now is work on these speaker holes. There's speakers that were in the cockpit on both sides, and I don't know what I'm going to do, if I'm going to put some new speakers or not, but what's for sure is this is the right time to do something about it before I get everything painted. So I think I'm going to close them up and have it painted over, and yeah, I'll worry about speakers in the future. So the plan is, I've just got these round discs which I've cut out of plywood. They're 110 mm across, and they're going to fit into the circle to give me something to laminate back against to close it up. It's a fairly large hole and there's not a lot of space either side to really dish it out and laminate over the whole thing. So the idea is to have something solid in the middle, epoxied in there with a couple of layers over the top to hold it in place and give it some strength. So basically I've got this circle and it's just screwed onto a backing plate. And as you can see here, I've used some fairly thick washers, about 2 mm thick, to offset this so that once it's held in place, it'll be inset by a couple of millimeters, which will allow me to put a couple of millimeters of laminate back. Okay, so let's put this all together. Got my epoxy here, so just a little bit around the edge. I could really do with a brush, but I don't have one. And obviously there's tape here to prevent it sticking. There's packing tape here, because that sort of mounting backing plate doesn't want to stick to anything. And a little bit of epoxy around the cavity. I wish I had a paintbrush. Okay, so now it's just a matter of screwing this backing plate on, and I'm using holes that the old speaker were using, so I'm not having to drill any holes, but obviously they'll be covered up with laminate and fairing material afterwards anyway, so it's not a problem. Okay, so that's nice and flush with the outside now. Now it's just a matter of going into a confined space and putting some thickened epoxy into that cavity there. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this, but it's a bit dark and a bit confined in here, but now it's just a matter of basically filling up this cavity with a good squeeze of thickened epoxy. There we go. And then once it's set, so I can take that backing plate off from the front, put some more epoxy on the front side, and then I can start feathering it back and putting some laminate on both sides. Okay, well I'll leave the update here at this point rather than building up to a really long one. I'll try and keep them a bit shorter. And as the comments that I've received in the past, I'll try and do less talking and more working. Okay, so next week, hopefully I've got my heating solution made. I'm still waiting on some ducting material that I've ordered that's a higher temperature. I found out that the air comes out at 400 degrees when it leaves that heating unit, so it's super hot. So hopefully I'll be able to set that up to get some heat in, and probably just another solid week of doing bits and pieces really to get it ready to put some primer down, and that will be a massive milestone. So anyway, come back next week and see what I'm up to at that point. Okay, thanks for watching. See you next week.